Well, good evening. Welcome to Center Stage at Beth, Israel. Today we have a special guest. His name is Adam Rosen. Could you tell us all about yourself, Adam?
I surely can. My name's Adam. I grew up in Akron, Ohio, and I like to say I escaped to the big city of Cleveland to go to law school in 2010. But I had deep roots in Akron. Third generation, born in Akron City Hospital. Both of my grandfathers practiced law in Akron and were very involved in the community. And so kind of everywhere I went, it was shaking hands and, getting to know all the different ins and outs of Akron. And my dad and my mom and others in my family were the same way. And so, there was a lot of pressure, I think, to carry on the family tradition and go to law school. But out of college, I worked in the Ohio legislature for a couple of years, and then decided, I think, through my own experience to go to law school. I was very clear with my family that I was making this decision on my own. I wasn't doing it out of pressure to follow in the footsteps, and I didn't even want to practice law. So I felt like I was going to go and get the law degree and use it as a versatile degree. But I did that at Cleveland State and moved downtown in 2010 and just fell in love with downtown and the city. And so, in Cleveland State, the law school there has such a good reputation in this town and a great alumni base. And the thing I'll say about Cleveland and where I felt really at home was that people encouraged me to get involved in everything. So I got to participate in all kinds of different leadership cohorts and serve on associate boards and really get to know Cleveland and understand that it was a different type of community than Akron. It's a much bigger town. There's a much bigger Jewish community here. And I really just fell in love with it. And so, during law school, you do well enough and they encourage you to go take these jobs at the bigger firms in town. And that's more or less what happened to me. And I ended up at a bigger firm in town and just didn't really love it. It was a lot of pressure. There was a billable hour requirement. It just didn't really fit for what I was doing. And I ended up then after that at Detroit Shoreway. And it was just kind of by happenstance. A solo practitioner hooked me up with them. And that's really where I think I came into my own and got to know a community really intimately, got to know the business community. I did economic development there, got to know real estate, and got to know the neighborhood. My wife and I moved to that neighborhood right as I took that job. We live in Gordon Square now, and we love living on the lake. We love the density of business, the theaters, Capitol Theater. We had our wedding pictures taken at Capitol Theater. It's just such a gem, 100-year-old theater restored, and really serves as the heart of a really unique urban neighborhood. And so we live there today, and I have my own law practice now. I left Detroit Shoreway in 2019 and have been practicing out on my own with a couple of different guys since then, so for about 3 years. And we love it. And I think I'm doing what I'm doing for the rest of my career. I say that all the time, and I really, really mean it. And it enables me to not only have a fulfilling practice and do really interesting things, but I can have my own schedule. I can be involved in all kinds of things in the community. I can do triathlon. I can do the vegan tailgate. I got all kinds of stuff, going on, not to mention what my wife Erin has going on. And, we just stay really, really active in the community. So it's a really great life in Cleveland. I brag about Cleveland everywhere I go. And, it's really a beautiful place to live and have a career.
So let's talk about some of the things that have led you to finding real estate. You've mentioned the words Detroit Shoreway. That to me is just a geographic area. Mm-hmm. Can you define how where those boundaries might be?
Yeah, I'll even back up a little further,
Okay.
Peter, and say that Cleveland has an extremely rich history of community development nonprofits. In fact, I think if you look around the state and around the country, the community development nonprofit model is really looked at in Cleveland as one of the preeminent models. And so I got a chance to go to an organization called Detroit Shoreway Community Development Organization. It's now called Northwest Neighborhoods. They merged with the Kudell Inc., the Kudell nonprofit, and that's really a trend that's been happening in the community development space of consolidation of declining funds from the federal level, from community block grant funds, and really just the ability to leverage resources with a greater population base in the specific geographic locations. And you asked me about the geographic location.
Yeah.
You know, when I was there, Detroit Shoreway encompassed, roughly speaking, because there's some overlap with Ohio City, from 45th to 85th, West 45th to West 85th, from I-90 north to the lake. So you're really looking at a near West Side neighborhood, the center of which is maybe 2 miles from downtown, and with Ohio City in the middle of that. And then there was the Kudell neighborhood, which ultimately Detroit Shoreway merged with, which just encompassed basically that same footprint, north-south, but going all the way west to 117th. So really looking now, Northwest Neighborhoods, as being the near West Side minus Ohio City and Tremont, north of I-90 from 45th to 117th on the border of Lakewood.
How many city councilmen would that include? The double area, Kudell and Detroit
Yeah, it's
Shoreway?
2 now, maybe 2.5.
Okay.
When I was at Detroit Shoreway, Councilman Matt Zone was the primary councilman for that ward. It encompassed that was most of his ward, and so it lined up nicely. And I'd say that across the city, the community development organizations that are successful or that have an easier time have a strong council person with leadership positions on council, with a history of getting things done. And I certainly got to experience that with Matt Zone when he was the council person there. And now Jenny Spencer, who is my direct supervisor while I was at Detroit Shoreway, is the council person. And so I have a great relationship with Jenny, and and she serves. The overlap is into the Kudell neighborhood, and so there's also the other near West Side council person who serves there, Brian Mooney, who I think might be stepping down. I can't quite remember. I don't live in that ward, so but yeah, there's a handful of other council people in that neighborhood.
So for people who don't live in that neighborhood, it's either a drive-through or go to the movie or go to have dinner. Is there activity going on that we don't see to make both of those areas better?
Yeah, I think, there's a lot of focus today, and it started while I was there. You could see the strategic direction of the neighborhood nonprofit changing to say, hey, look, mission accomplished with Gordon Square to a certain extent, right? There was a Gordon Square separate nonprofit, the Gordon Square Arts District, which was founded in the mid-aughts by a really interesting group of people that had a commitment to neighborhood development through the arts, and saying, hey, we've got some great assets here. Cleveland Public Theater.
James Levin.
Right, James Levin.
Thank you very much, James.
Yeah, and a handful of other theaters. The Capitol Theater was undergoing the renovation at the time. They were one of the first in the country to use federal new markets tax credits. And Detroit Shoreway Community Development Organization really was an expert in tax credit development. The arcade where the Capitol Theater is located, right at 65th in Detroit, has a really interesting history. The late Judge Ray Pianka, who was that organization's executive director and a board member for a long time, really was instrumental in saving that building from the urban renewal programs of the 70s and 80s, and then using some of the early iterations of federal tax credits to put life back into that building. Because, for a lot of these projects, and Detroit Shoreway still today is really an expert in affordable housing tax credits, but they've used historic tax credits and new markets to be able to infuse capital into projects that otherwise wouldn't pencil, otherwise wouldn't work, and have been vital to preserving affordable housing and the historic buildings in a neighborhood that, really now calls that it's its calling card, to have those historic buildings, to have affordable housing right in the center of Gordon Square. And you combine that with the retail development and the arts and all the private development going on around there now, that's where the mission accomplished comes from. And so the focus of the organization, as I explained a second ago, has shifted to some of the parts of the neighborhood that haven't seen that investment. And there are stark contrasts from block to block within my neighborhood. Within Cleveland, it's one of the most unequal cities in the entire country. There's really shocking, figures about child poverty, about infant mortality, about lead paint and the impacts of that, and crime, and all those other things that really vary from block to block and neighborhood to neighborhood. So whereas there could be houses selling for $400,000, $500,000, $600,000 just around the corner from me, there's also houses that are going through foreclosure that no one wants, that need to be torn down and need investment and people to come in and put dollars, and need to be really creative around what types of programs there are to help revitalize those parts of the neighborhood. And they're really close by. And so what you've seen now is organizations like Cleveland Housing Network, CHN, or others that really focus on affordable housing, building housing and doing it in a way that's accessible to people. So rent to own, or other types of programs that encourage home ownership or encourage affordable rentals so that it's for everyone. Because the risk you run, of course, is that these neighborhoods develop and it's not for everyone. It's only for a certain type of person. It's for people moving into the neighborhood or whatever it may be.
So what's the difference between a state tax credit and a federal tax credit?
Yeah, so each state has their own kind of tax credit programs. I would say that Ohio's most well-known tax credit program is the historic tax credit. The other tax credit programs, they also have a catalytic tax credit program that's really for bigger projects. So you've seen like May Company or some of the other buildings downtown take advantage of those. But for the most part, the state historic tax credit is the one that is most used at the state level, whereas the federal level is the affordable housing and the new markets, and they also have a historic tax credit as well. It's a little hard to qualify for the federal historic tax credit. So what you see is developers, especially like nonprofit developers like Detroit Shoreway, taking advantage of federal affordable housing tax credits as well, and state. There's both kinds. And then, of course, also using the state historic tax credits. So it's usually a combination of things.
Is that right?
That enables a project to get off the ground. And there's also local financing authorities like the Port and other nonprofits or kind of nonprofit hybrid lending institutions that are able to finance real estate projects and really make them happen. And Cleveland's very well known. Again, I mentioned their reputation for community development nonprofits. It's also very well known in the affordable housing space. So there are some national affordable housing developers that are based here in Cleveland, like NRP Group, like Pearl, that actually attract a lot of talent from the community development space.
Is that right?
To go and work. So, a lot of my former colleagues work at some of these affordable housing developers that really work on the national level.
So let's change the subject just for a moment. How do you and your group find properties that you think might be worthy of working? How does that happen?
Yeah, and I'd say to people now, when I worked for Detroit Shoreway, it was similar but a little bit different. I think we had an obligation as a community development organization, and community development organizations today still, have an obligation to serve the communities where their geographic boundaries are. And so that service often got mistaken for like a government entity. We are, I guess, community development is, I guess, are quasi-governmental, but they're not. They're a 501c3 nonprofit that obtains some funding through the city, through the block grant program. But like I mentioned, that pool of money has shrunk, and it's very cumbersome. Some of my least favorite memories from working there were filling out those monthly reports and trying to navigate that. I know City Hall today is really working on trying to do that better and actually maybe using that money in a different way so it's not tied to the operating budgets of community development nonprofits. But for the most part, the rest of our funds either came from private philanthropic dollars, like organizations like Cleveland Neighborhood Progress, or from fundraising. And so when you think about where the dollars come from, it's not really our tax dollars that are funding community development nonprofits. It's really private philanthropic and fundraising that make a lot of that happen. And so that's where I think there was a lot of, kind of misconception about, and still to this day, about the role that a community development organization plays and who, ultimately is, the constituent. And really the constituent are the neighborhood residents, because the mission statements and the board makeup and, and the programs are all designed to benefit a community, but it's really a supplemental thing. In a perfect world, we wouldn't need those organizations, because City Hall or the neighborhood, was thriving. The region's thriving. There's jobs for everyone. All that stuff. So when you go back to your original question about how do you find those properties, when you're a community development organization, they find you because you hear about them. People are using those organizations as an outlet to say, hey, something needs to be done about this, or this is an important intersection that needs revitalized, or it's clear that, this is an area we should be focusing on, and they do strategic planning and, all kinds of work and surveying the community about priorities and things of that nature. Today, as a private attorney that works in that space, I'd say that my practice focuses on community development, certainly. It also focuses on entrepreneurship and social enterprise and nonprofit in a broader sense. So I'm not just limited geographically anymore. I can work all over the city and state.
Sure, yeah.
And I don't necessarily find those projects. I think my clients are the ones who drive all of that work, and they more or less are saying, what type of attorney can help me do what I need to do and have a holistic approach and an understanding of all the pieces and parts that make a project successful. And so when we do legal work, we're doing certainly all the transactional documents, but I think we have an added value of the counsel and understanding of all the different players and all the different dynamics that go to making their project successful. And so I'm not really finding projects. I think people know, or through word of mouth or, whatever, they end up finding us, and it just ends up being the right fit. So I guess I'm really fortunate in that regard to be able to say, we have a successful law firm because of our reputation, of, our ability to work in dynamic spaces and, really help our clients, kind of have successful projects more than just the financial numbers. It's successful in a way that, helps and grows communities. It's successful in a way that provides jobs, and, we're in it for the long haul with them, and we're a part of a broader team that they're putting together to do what they want to do.
Well, certainly the practice of law gives you an opportunity to show a product at the end of the day. This is what we've done. There's a project going on now, Lorraine and Warren Road there. The Aldi's project.
Yeah.
There used to be the old Kmart. That was an old Kmart building for a long, long time. And now, I'm not going to use the word resurrected, but it's being resurrected.
Yeah.
There's something new happening there. Not every lawyer can take their practice to a place where they have evidence of all they've accomplished. So kudos to you for that.
Yeah.
Tell us about, if there is, I believe the answer is yes, but I'll ask the question first. I'll use a competition with a small c, first between different wards of the city. Is there such a thing? Are they all fighting for the same community dollar in Ward 1, Ward 2, Ward 3, all the different wards, Ward 10? And how does that play out?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it kind of relates to the funding streams that I talked about for community development organizations a few minutes ago, and that, CDBG dollars, Community Development Block Grant dollars, through HUD, are in the city of Cleveland allocated to each council person, and they have a say in how those dollars are then allocated in
City
their
council
ward,
person.
to their city council person.
Oh my gosh.
And they have a say how those dollars are allocated in those wards. And so when I mentioned that, strong council people in leadership positions, that's an important factor in whether or not community development organizations are successful. It's also a matter of how much are the council people committing of those dollars to those organizations and working with them hand in hand to be able to pull off projects and really help grease the wheels for development.
Yeah.
I think less and less the CDCs, the community development corporations, are relying on those dollars, just because, again, like the pool has dried up a little bit. And I think we're going to see a shift in the next few years under the Bibb administration. And I have no facts to back this up, but I just have a sense that those dollars for CDBG are going to be used a little bit differently, and they're not going to be as tied to each ward and each community development nonprofit. And so hopefully what can happen is there's a robust support, and a lot of this is driven through private philanthropy, and we have a really, really rich tapestry of private philanthropy in Cleveland, that they are able to be well-funded and do their things, and it's not so much based on the haves and have-nots. And you'll see, I think, the private philanthropy and the direction that they've gone with how they invest their dollars, really trying to focus some of those energies on the neighborhoods that are perceived as the have-nots. And so, what that means for neighborhoods like Detroit Shoreway that are seen as mission accomplished, or at least parts of them are, is that they're going to have, be more reliant on their own fundraising efforts and getting creative with their social enterprise, with their own development efforts, taking development fees on some of those projects that I mentioned, and really funding themselves that way. Whereas some of the philanthropic dollars and other things might be channeled to some of the neighborhoods that need it, based on that inequality that we see across the city. And it's a big challenge. I mean, how do you pull up some of the lowest rungs of our society? And it's really like, you have all these great momentum, and Cleveland's, kind of revitalizing, and, there's some great stories happening, but there's also some really tragic stories. And it's going to take a concentrated effort by a lot of people to turn that around. Community development organizations will play a role in that, but it's going to have to be all the private institutions, everyone, all kind of rowing in the same direction.
Yeah.
And you hope that leadership at the top, whether it be the mayor or a new county executive, is going to be able to kind of help rally the troops and really focus some of those energies.
How about suburb to suburb? I've talked about this with both of the candidates. It doesn't seem to be much of a pull here for regionalism. There really is more of a poaching going on. Do you sense that in your view of real estate projects, commercial real estate projects, community to a community, little neighboring communities?
Of course, yeah.
How do you feel
it
about
state
that?
to state as well. I mean, when I started at Detroit Shoreway doing economic development, I really didn't know what it meant. I mean, to be quite honest, I thought it was just like job attraction and the things that are big flashy things that you see, like the Intel factory down in Southern Ohio, in Central Ohio. But really, economic development runs the gamut of just neighborhood to neighborhood, meaning like, I'm helping a small business open in a retail location for the first time, making sure their business plan is in order, making sure they have some support systems and a team around them, all the way up to the Intels. And so, what you've seen is some of that competition happening at especially city to city and state to state levels. I don't get too involved in that in my day to day. I really am focused on, there's a project in the works. I'm going to be, a resource based on what they're looking to do. A lot of what I work on is in the city proper. And so I don't spend a ton of time working in suburban communities or outside of Cleveland. And I take a lot of pride in that. I mean, I think it started from my dad and my family saying, I'm going to continue to raise my family in the city proper. And really commit to that and live that life and say, I want to do things that help the city, because that's, again, the central kind of focus of all 60 municipalities in the county. And, you see the challenges that presents. And you would hope that there was collaboration and things of that nature. I think a new county executive is going to have a real opportunity to help foster some of that, even if they're not combining. And you would hope that resources are allocated based on need and not on competitive or other types of poaching type strategies. But yeah, I mean, it kind of remains to be seen. I think there's a lot of opportunity in Cleveland, especially in Cuyahoga County, to be able to pull some of that off.
So we can't speak about rehab and recharging without talking about brownfields. That all the communities submitted their applications the last 60 days.
Right.
Everybody's trying to grab some brownfield money, because you can't work at the Ford plant, or you can't work here, or you can't work there until you have good water and everything taken care of underneath.
Right.
Explain to our audience what the issue is with trying to take care of the brownfield problem. Explain it to us.
Yeah, I mean, in the simplest sense, Cleveland has a very deep industrial
no pun intended
history. Yeah, and there are some really toxic lands because of that. And
Yes.
there's a lot of history that is even as impactful as the founding of the EPA and some of the Clean Water Acts all are because of
Our river.
how polluted we were. And so there's a lot of complex history as it relates to our, dirty lands and dirty water and pollutants. And it's still an issue, but, I think a lot of it has gotten better. But what's left is a littered landscape of sites that are economically not feasible to develop unless there is a subsidy to clean them up first.
Yes.
And so that is the simplest way to describe, we've got a long history of industry, we've got a lot of dirty property. So when you see that abandoned site and you're like, why hasn't anyone ever done anything with that? Well, it's probably dirty and it needs to be cleaned up. And the only way that ever makes sense economically for a private developer is if they get some subsidy to do that. And there's a vested interest for the taxpayer and for the average citizen to say, I want my tax money to be able to go to help some of those projects move along. And I think there's also a little bit of a tragic history in that, and not to get too political, but I did work in the state legislature and I still am involved in a lot of campaigns. In Columbus, they don't prioritize urban areas as much as they could. And I think what you see is kind of a pull away of environmental dollars. Some of the Clean Ohio dollars and other resources that were available have actually been channeled into other economic development efforts that don't necessarily impact cities or brownfields as much as they could. This latest wave of money is just as a result of surplus from all of the stimulus money from COVID. And so that's the reason it's happening. It's guided from federal dollars coming in, but the state has not really committed to brownfield remediation nearly as much as they could.
Wow.
And that's a reflection of the leadership in Columbus. And so I'd love to see more dollars coming into brownfield remediation. And I've worked on a few projects where that's been an issue. Certainly nearly every project, commercial project at least, that I work on has to do environmental assessments,
Yes.
which are not cheap in and of themselves just to find out what's there.
Yes.
But if there is an issue and it's significant, it oftentimes will kill a deal and make that site really a difficult site to develop unless there's some subsidy from every phase of the assessment to the cleanup and ensuring that it's safe to build on.
And the reality of it is, if there wasn't money for it 30 years ago, and there hasn't been money for it yet, the options, it's going to remain undeveloped.
Right.
And the water seepage and all the bad things that are happening down there is going to continue to happen.
Right. Yeah, and one of the prime examples of success, like Battery Park, is, it was a very dirty site.
Yeah.
And if it wasn't for several rounds of
Perfect
both state
example.
and federal subsidy coming in there,
Yeah.
you wouldn't have the development there on the lakefront. You wouldn't have the other infrastructure things that happened around there, like the 73rd tunnel
Yeah.
and the 76th
Yeah.
tunnel, the pedestrian tunnel, and real investment in the Shoreway project, real investment in what really now is a crown jewel of the city, of the region, Edgewater Park.
Yes.
All of that really started from an environmental remediation project on a brownfield site that
Yeah.
absolutely needed to be, something needed to be done. And it's amazing what a catalyst like that can do to change a whole neighborhood and to change really a park and an area that, is now looked at as the crown jewel, I think, of Cleveland.
So I think it's a very easy segue to go from that exact point to the Opportunity Corridor, which I don't know if you've been on it yet.
A couple times.
But you can get on it at 77, and you're at the clinic in about 4 signals.
Yeah.
But you certainly do see north and south areas that most likely are brownfields
Right.
that have not been developed and that could use some development. We can't depend upon the clinic making it all the way to 55th Street.
Right.
So, is that an area where you see growth potential?
Certainly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm also a bit of a transportation
That was my next
advocate,
issue.
So
Yeah,
there's
yeah.
a lot that goes into what the Opportunity Corps represents, how that money was spent, is that really going to be as a road a catalyst for development? Sometimes it can be.
Okay.
Certainly at the neighborhood micro level, it is. I think the streetscape at 65th in Detroit was a big part of the catalyst that enabled Gordon Square to be the neighborhood that it is today.
Okay.
Opportunity Corridor is a little bit different in that eminent domain was a big part of, kind of taking some of those properties to enable that road. It's got a bike path.
Can you tell us?
Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Tell the audience what does that mean, eminent domain?
Yeah, it's a
Besides being a legal term.
Yeah, it's
in
a
the reality,
public
what is it?
taking. It's
Yeah.
a public taking.
Yeah.
The government can come in and say, there is a public purpose here. We are going to seize your land. You're going to be compensated for it, but you don't
Yeah.
have a choice in the matter.
Yeah.
And actually, Cleveland has a really kind of icky history with public
I-90,
with eminent domain and I-90 and the highways.
Yeah.
What you see actually, Gordon Square is a success story in that there was going to be a connection. If you ever gotten off at 65th on 71,
correct.
there was going to be a connection all the way up to the Shoreway.
Yes.
And there was a lot of advocacy in the 70s. Actually, Matt Zone's father, who was a councilman at the time, who the rec center is named after, that
Yeah.
was a staging site to be able to connect those highways. If that would have happened, there is no way Gordon Square is what it is today. And what you saw, what happened, regardless of whether that success story, we're talking about that or not, was neighborhoods were split and poverty
Yes.
just kind of trickled out from
Yes.
that split. And
Yes.
so, I think Opportunity Corridor tried not to be that. It said, look at how decimated this is. We're going to try to avoid, some of the impacts that are, could happen from splitting up a neighborhood, and really use that road as a connection point. It's not a highway, so it's not the same kind of
Correct.
impact. But, I think a lot of people do look at it as an extension of the highway, just taking people from the burbs into the clinic without
Yes.
having to stop at every light in what is considered one of the worst or some of the toughest neighborhoods in Cleveland. And so it's a tough narrative, given our history, to, I guess, sell given the cost. I mean, do I think that there's a chance for it to work and there's development around there? Absolutely. And I think they did some things pretty well. I mentioned the bike path. I think they've tried to be thoughtful when it comes to the types of development they had there.
Yeah.
But, I think there's also a tendency to look for easy wins when it comes to the type of development there.
Yeah.
So if there's like public facilities or like I think there's like a new police station or something going over there, that's not exactly what was envisioned when it was like, let's spur development, not just like a place to put buildings that you were going to build anyway.
Got it.
It's really meant to be an economic catalyst and provide jobs and really be from the community rather than, coming in from the outside and really, just having there be a few random, institutional buildings there.
Yeah.
So we'll see. I mean,
Yeah.
I've talked to some people who want to do things over there now because of it, that there's true opportunity to, invest in land there that otherwise that would never have gotten a look
Yeah.
from private developers.
Yeah.
So I guess it remains to be seen. But I'm hopeful that, there are some strategic investments from the city or from the county, or there are regional economic development organizations like Team NEO and Jobs Ohio looking at those sites and really saying, hey, we need to prioritize this area
Yeah.
and use our attraction efforts to really focus and give a little bit of a leg up to some of those communities and neighborhoods over there.
The man who took eminent domain to a different level, of course, was Robert Moses. In every city has its highways. In every city, you only get highways if you take the houses out.
Right.
And the separation, we all know that we have a river between one side of town and the rest, but the other separation was really done by I-90.
Yep.
It created tremendous havoc. When I got here in 78, I-90 ended at 117th, didn't even go out west yet.
Right.
That's how long
And
it's
now
been.
they're still building new exits.
And now
I
they're
mean,
still building wider roads.
wider roads, new exits.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
as a transit advocate, as someone who believes in moving away from a car-centric culture, that has seen the destructive nature of that, that has
Yes.
seen the destructive nature in a sense that it is one of the, if not the biggest factor of some of the inequality that we have in this area,
Absolutely.
that we need to do better and really either work to eliminate some of those roads or at least curb some of that, because it's just pulling resources out of the city and causing people to say, hey, it's not worth me trying to fix because they're going to put a new exit out and I can go build a new house on this, exurban land. And it's really frustrating because a lot of that policy is driven not from the local levels, it's driven from the state and federal levels because of the dollars that exist.
Yeah.
And so, you're fighting a battle on multiple fronts. And I think we as, private citizens, as individuals, can only do so much, but I think we do lead by our actions. So whether that's driving less or using your bike or committing to live in a neighborhood where you can walk and get around without having to use a car, and doing simple things at the city level, which I think the new administration is going to do, like removing parking minimums for projects. So saying, why are we subsidizing parking lots when we should just be saying, hey, if there's no parking, take the bus, take an Uber, walk, improving public transit so people can actually get to jobs in some of the suburban areas where these companies are, and really investing in those things rather than, investing in highway dollars. So this is a deep, kind of philosophical thing that I think we all have to agree on as a country, as citizens of Cleveland, of Ohio, whatever it may be, and really push our elected officials to advocate for reallocating some of those dollars away from the highways and pushing out, and really focus on public transit and improving our urban core.
So I wrote down 2 questions about transportation, and you've already talked about them on a residential level. And then you just mentioned transit. If we're going to create jobs along the opportunity corridor, if we're going to ask private companies, we're going to have to figure out a way to get people there to work there.
That's right.
And it seems to me that infrastructure on a city this size is a travesty.
Right.
Am I being fair?
Yeah, and there's a lot of reasons for it. And I think a lot of it is investment from state resources, and the RTA is doing what it can with its own funding and things of that nature. I'm not. There are organizations and a lot of my friends who are very, very committed to this topic, and they speak passionately about this at city council meetings, at state legislative hearings, at rallies, and trying to improve not only the funding that comes in, but also the inner workings and how those resources are then spent and allocated once they're here. A simple thing to do would be like decriminalizing the fares. It's actually, you can spend time in jail and pay fines, significant fines, for riding a bus without paying for a bus ticket. I mean, little simple things that don't really cost any money, like decriminalizing the fare crimes in Cleveland, would go a long way to making our public transit more accessible. Now, there's also much broader kind of issues at play, but I think over time, it's not like we have to reinvent the wheel. There are cities and regions that have invested in public transit after they've done a terrible job or had a lack of resources, and turned a corner very quickly based on investment and smart people being in charge and using models that exist. And so it's really going to be an important factor. Public transit and investing in public transit can be an important factor in any further revitalization of the city and of the region.
My family, we spent a lot of time in Cincinnati. They have above ground trains, electric trains going out to over the Rhine, coming back from downtown. It'd be like a train going from downtown to West 65th. Just goes back and forth. Not clogging up the air with dirty smog. It just goes back and forth. You go to Europe, I don't know if you've been to the Europe, any European city, it's trains or everything. Everybody rides the trains.
And even cities that maybe you compare to Cleveland, maybe they're a little further down the road, they've invested in new cars and new lines and things like you're talking about. I mean, even if, I don't know when the last time RTA invested in a new car for the transit system here, for the Red Line. I mean, and there's so many service interruptions, people are turned off by it, and they don't make it's not easy in a lot of senses. Now, I think they've made improvements, but again, they're going to need more resources and really smart people to invest, and they're going to need people to use it. Again, I think it's the same thing I said about the car culture. We as private consumers, as citizens, can help make our own decisions to use those things and say, hey, we want them to be better. And the more people that use it and the more people that call for that, the greater the chances that happens. And that's going to be, again, crucial to any further revitalization and economic growth in the region.
So let's change the subject slightly to the issue of ownership. In many communities, you have either foreign ownership or outside of Ohio ownership of real estate projects. Is that currently happening in Cleveland area?
Oh, of course. Yeah, I think there was a big article about, and even had some really interesting maps in Cleveland.com and the Plain Dealer recently about the growth in out-of-state investment through LLCs and through companies because of the ability to enter the market at a low number. Cleveland still has relatively affordable real estate, especially in the single-family home and the rental markets, and the ability to actually charge a decent enough rent where your return in Cleveland is going to get you a lot more than it would in some of the hotter markets across the country. And there's a lot of risk when out-of-state investors come in. It's interesting because in my practice, we do help some out-of-state investors do it what I think to be the right way. There is a right way to do it. And, it involves, playing by all the rules, first and foremost. It involves maintaining your property. It involves setting things up in a way that, your tenants are going to be able to, have a quality place to live at a decent price. Now, I still think that there's a private market thing at play here where if there's going to be money to be made, regardless of how well they're doing it, it's still going to drive up costs if there are more players in the buying of investment property.
Sure.
But, it's tough to say, like, hey, as a government, preventing out-of-state investors from buying property. I don't think you can legally speaking do that. But I think you can, through enforcement, through rulemaking and other things, allow for when that investment does come to do it in such a way that is beneficial to communities rather than a drain on them. The issue is when you have these absentee landlords who don't play by the rules and who aren't responsive to their tenants' needs and are, they own houses that just need remediated. I think the Lead Safe initiative is going to go a long way to kind of cracking the whip on some of these absentee landlords. But it's going to rely heavily on enforcement, and we need resources to be able to do that. So. Yeah, I guess time will tell if that's going to be a successful initiative.
You just mentioned rulemaking. Some people who are in different stages of private sector say the government is too involved in our process, too many rules, too many steps, just let us do our work. And of course, the answer from the municipalities and the counties is, if we let you just do your work, you're not going to do it right. So we have to have some control back and forth. Tell us about how you feel about that.
I hear from clients all the time, why is it like this? Why is this so cumbersome? At Detroit Shoreway,
is it cumbersome?
It's very cumbersome.
That's interesting.
I think what makes it cumbersome is there's a lot on our administrators and our municipalities' plates, first and foremost. They're understaffed, they don't have all the resources they need, and they're drinking from a fire hose day in and day out. There's also a sense of a hodgepodge of rules and laws that have kind of been cobbled together over time that need clear and concise reform so that it's easy for the administrative side, on the municipal side, to be able to do their jobs, but also easier for private developers or people who are looking to do things that require approval or require compliance to be able to understand what those things are and have a very simple way to do it. Whether that's through the use of technology or through the use of things like form-based code that are just easier to understand rather than like a book of rules that have reference points to other things. So there's a lot of things at play. At the same time, I actually welcome change and more regulation of certain markets that are taking advantage of people or are causing strain on our communities. And I think what happens is private developers and things, they just don't want to do that work sometimes to be able to get through it. We really try to help people do that. We try to have relationships and try to simplify it, and through that experience try to advocate for changes and be a part of initiatives that simplify and make things easier to comprehend. But man, I have a lot of sympathy for the folks who work on the administrative side of it. I try to stay in really good contact and understand their pain points. And so when I'm reaching out on behalf of a client, I'm trying to help them help us and really make for a way to do compliance that doesn't hold down a project, that doesn't have cost overruns or delays or all the things that you see, frankly, in every single project in the city. So it's tough.
Talk about downtown residents.
Yeah.
Is it still growing numbers-wise and building-wise?
Yeah, Downtown Cleveland Alliance does a great job with kind of tracking some of the growth there. The apartment market has stayed strong, despite COVID and everything else. It's still a very popular place to live, and they're building more and more units there.
They are building more and more.
They've continued to grow. And there's always, I think there's some anecdotal stuff that happens on the kind of analytical level about like where are all these people coming from, and how can they keep bringing people in. I think there's still a strong demand for apartments in Cleveland.
Right.
I see them going up on the near west side. I see them going up downtown. There's people that want to live in the urban core. There's people that want to be here because there's just a lot going on. It's very accessible. It's easy to get around. There's a great theater district. There's sports teams. There's jobs, to a certain extent. And so there's a demand for living downtown, and it's exciting. I know when I moved back to Cleveland in 2010, I lived downtown, and it was right at the start of some of this growth in the apartment market and everything else. It was amazing. If it wasn't for our desire to be on the lake and have a house, I'd probably still be downtown. I think we're still in the early stages, frankly, of some of that growth in apartments and things in the downtown and central neighborhoods.
If we go east we get to Shaker Square. I know I just read about the bailout. I got to call it a bailout. That's what it was.
Sure.
Not the first time Shaker Square in the past 30 years has had bailout. Tell us what you know about what needs to be done to turn the corner. Is it possible to turn the corner there? And how can we make that happen?
Yeah, I wasn't too involved in that project. Even though I'm from Akron, I like to say I have no side, no east or west affiliation. The fact that I live on the west side and have lived on the west side now for almost a decade, it's like I tend to focus some of my energies on the west side. I think Shaker Square is really interesting because it is uniquely situated and could be a catalyst for some really interesting growth in and around the Larchmere neighborhood, and just it touches on a lot of neighborhoods. It's a linchpin for a number of East Side neighborhoods. But I have not closely followed the bailout, as you call it, or the receivership and some of the local stakeholders that were really involved in making sure that it was in good hands and was able to develop. I think the only thing I can speak from is my experience, working in Gordon Square and seeing what a central core investment can do to be able to turn around not just that area, but all the surrounding areas. And you hope that there's anchors that come in, that they're able to find ways to improve the actual buildings and attract tenants and small businesses and other people that really kind of have that exciting, vibrant, style of a business district there.
How important are our professional sports teams to our city, from your perspective?
Yeah, as much as I love sports, and I do. I was listening to the Guardians game on the way over. The Cavs are playing right now in the play-in game. I grew up on Cleveland sports. That was my first introduction, and first through 500th introduction, all coming to Cleveland sports games from Akron. When the Richfield Coliseum went away and they built the arena downtown. As a kid, I was like, oh, this is cool, a new arena. I think as today, as a citizen of Cleveland, I think we should put a more critical lens on the public dollars that go to subsidize these billionaire sports teams.
Yes.
As much as I love the sports teams, it really pains me to see the obligation that we as taxpayers have to propping up these sports teams that, frankly, a lot of the numbers that they roll out as it relates to economic growth and the impact that they have on the region, it sounds made up to me, Peter. I frankly just don't believe a lot of it.
Yeah.
And I think those dollars, again, should be going to things like transit and things that will make a real difference in people's lives. So it's tricky. And it's not in a vacuum that we can talk about this, because I think what you see is a competitive national landscape of, if Cleveland doesn't put public dollars in, is another city that wants a sports team going to take the sports team away?
Yeah.
And then what happens? Is it really that bad? Other than obviously me losing my treasured, childhood memories of watching professional baseball in Cleveland.
Yeah.
Is it a net negative to the region if we lost a sports team? I don't know. And I think it's worth a critical analysis of, should our public dollars be going to prop up some of these billionaires' investments? So it's a complicated question, and I shouldn't let my loyalties to, despite all the losing that we've done, except for the Cavs in 2016, which, other than my wedding night, was the greatest night of my life. Being downtown with my parents on Father's Day, with my brothers, with some of my best friends, and celebrating, it's a beautiful night and a beautiful experience to be able to do that. But like, would I trade it for more people having jobs and being able to provide for their families? I don't think so. You know, like I think I would say like, let's do those things and really invest our dollars in that. So it's tough. It's a really big picture question that we're going to continue to have to answer because we have obligations as taxpayers and as as a public entity, as the municipalities do to those teams.
So up and down 71, my wife and I have been going to Cincinnati a lot. We're going to Buffalo, up and down 90. But specifically I-71, as you approach the general Cincinnati area, there is corporation after corporation after corporation.
Columbus too.
Columbus, amazing. You cross into Kentucky and you'd think you were in Austin, Texas. For 25 or 30 miles, all there are corporate. I get the feeling Cleveland's lost out on that issue.
Yeah, it's tough. I think there hasn't been leadership that has been cohesive and been able to pull together all the resources here to be able to say to a company, like, we have everything you need. Because it's not just a piece of land or an institution like Cleveland Clinic. It's a workforce. It's a whole range of factors, places to live, accessible transit, all the things that bring people to and from regions to be able to work. And so, I'm really hopeful. I think, I've only been in Cleveland now since, like I said, since 2010. I'm really hopeful with new administration at City Hall. We're going to get a chance at a new county executive for there to be a really good working partnership to be able to attract some of those companies. Because ultimately that's, whether we like it or not, in the capitalist society that we live in, a lot of the success of the region is going to depend on having good paying jobs for people that live here. And not only attracting people from the outside, but for the people that actually live here to improve their quality of life, to increase their spending power, and to be able to then have the trickle effects of, what Cleveland once was, a place where there was small businesses thriving everywhere, to a place where there were lots of good paying jobs that they could provide for their families. Now, there are clearly national factors and global factors at play versus the Cleveland that was once, a top 5 largest city in the country to what it is today, a declining population still. So, obviously we can't win it all back, but I think there are a lot of things that we can do to attract some of those companies and attract some of that growth, because we have some really great public universities here, public and private universities. And I think between those and the ability to attract people to, like, the same thing that I love about living here, having the lake, having it just be very accessible, affordable, having opportunities to have, rich outside philanthropic involvement, to have a great park system, all the things that we love about living here should apply to anyone looking at Cleveland. And so when I talk to people from LA who's telling me all they can really talk about is the weather. But when you talk about Cleveland, I could rattle off a dozen things that are my favorite parts about living here. And at some point, whether it be climate change or, who knows what, hopefully it's an alignment of, all of the forces in Cleveland attracting some companies and those companies saying, hey, look, we can do this here because it's a great place to live. It's a great place to raise a family, and we can have the workforce and be able to invest in communities and really do some great things.
I think that for your generation and maybe the one after your generation, nothing is more important than the fresh water.
Right.
Nothing more important than the Great Lakes that we have.
Absolutely.
That Colorado doesn't have, that all the states out west don't have. We have Great Lakes. We have fresh water right, 4 or 5 miles from here. That has to be considered one of our most important assets.
Absolutely. That's where I start every time.
And they're all grabbing at it. I know that. They're all fighting to grab our water to support all those areas around the country. One more geographic area I want to ask you about, Burke Lakefront Airport.
Yeah.
And other than the corporate planes that come in and out for all the people that need that access, is there a better way to use those 2 square miles?
Of course. I think there are some interesting factors at play, including some of the federal aviation contracts and other things that tie that land to being airport, and the buyout numbers for those are not insignificant. And so there are some things that make development there, just based on the numbers alone and getting out from some of the obligations, complicated. That being said, if there was a true focus on it and a study and a plan that was going to be feasible, that was going to turn profits and wasn't going to be a boondoggle like the Center for Health Innovation or some of the other things that we've tried to do and just haven't done well, that it could work. But I think it's going to be a generational project. And so, what needs to happen now is really investing in planning, saying this needs to be something else, a commitment to look at it seriously, and then over time to develop that plan and chunk it off in phases to be able to do something there. But I absolutely believe that we need to take better advantage of our lakefront and our waterways and use that as our number one asset, like you mentioned, not just for the clean water, but the ability to live on a beautiful lake, that is really improved. And there's a lot of stuff going on right now with keeping it clean and really investing in that. It's really important that we utilize that as an asset, not only for the water that we drink and use for industry and use for our drinking water, but also as a way to attract investment along it. And so, I think can happen. It's just going to take a lot of time and be a generational project.
Yeah. This may be the most complicated question I've asked you, most theoretical question. That is the Cleveland schools. And, to the suburban viewer, it's a weak link. To the people who need Cleveland schools as their only option, it's such an important link, but it seems as though we can't really grow in the ways you've talked about now for 54 and a half minutes unless our weakest link gets better.
Sure.
Is that fair?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that's something I've heard over and over again since I moved here. My wife and I don't have kids, but Erin works with her nonprofit, Drink Local, Drink Tap, in the Cleveland School District. She knows the ups and downs of trying to get in first and foremost. She's worked really hard to develop that partnership, but she knows the challenges those schools face and the need for rich curriculum and to improve factors that really start well beyond and before they reach the classroom. And so there are a lot of factors at play as to why having an urban school district is challenging. Now, I think there's a lot that could be done to improve the school system. There's no doubt about it. No one's resting on their laurels. I think they have made progress in committing through their Say Yes to Education program and really saying, hey, let's get kids all the way through and into college, into post-secondary, whether it's college or not. I think just a further beyond high school educational opportunity, and using that as a way to keep families in the city of Cleveland. I mean, how many of my friends and colleagues have said when their kids reach school age, public school age, they're out.
Out they go.
I see it over and over again. I'll continue to see it. And, that's a choice people make, but it's not made any easier when they don't have confidence in the school system. So it's certainly one of those things that I know the current administration is spending a lot of focus and energy on, and they'll have to continue to do that. And again, there are broader issues at play, not just outside of the classroom, but our unequal funding structure from the state, and just our lack of investment in public education across the board at the state level. That really needs to be, they're working uphill. They're working, against a lot of factors that make success very challenging. So it's definitely an issue, and I hope that over the course of my lifetime, we see that start to improve.
And it has to be a community effort, certainly. I think one of the things I've learned this hour is that while the topic might just be real estate, it really involves everything.
Right.
Does that make your job easier or harder?
I love that. That makes it interesting. It makes it fulfilling. It makes it that the impact of the things I work on impact my life, impact my neighbors' lives. And not just my friends or my neighbors that I know, but also the neighbors that I don't know. Mm-hmm. The folks a few blocks away that are living paycheck to paycheck, that are struggling day in and day out, and there's just the deck is stacked against them.
Yes.
And we need to unstack that deck and put things in people's favor so that everyone is living in a better community. It's not just a better community for me, it's a better community for everyone. And I think because I have that, in the back of my mind, no matter what project I'm working on, that makes it rewarding and fulfilling, despite some of the, transactional lawyer documents, that really don't, if you just look at the document and stay within the four corners of it, maybe not as exciting. And so I think having that bigger picture perspective is really, really important. And it makes for, more successful projects, and it kind of is give and take. And it comes back to me as well.
So there has to be that commitment, doesn't there?
Right.
There won't be growth without the commitment to bringing everybody along with it, right?
Yep. And people need to commit to stuff outside of their jobs. I mean, volunteer involvement, there's so much need for that. I mean, I've volunteered on and off in city schools, pretty much since I got to Cleveland. I'm going to be doing a mentorship program next year that's really, I'm looking forward to.
Wow.
It's just little things like that, like investing beyond just, what you're doing in your jobs or maybe you're doing in your neighborhood, and saying, hey, we need to commit to everyone and making this a better place for everyone to live. And there's the thing about Cleveland is if you want to be involved in something, you can do it. And it's really rewarding. And I think there's a great number of people that I've learned from, mentors of mine, and I try to return that favor to young people. And we just really lift each other up through giving back, and that's really an important piece of everything I do.
You're a confident man, aren't you?
I like talking, so thank you for having me up here. I could talk on any of these topics.
Well,
I love living in the city. I come from a family of public servants, and I'm really fortunate to have had an education and seen the ups and downs of what it's like to live in an urban area, and
yes.
I'm really committed to making it better. And I wouldn't live here. I didn't leave. I wouldn't have gone anywhere else. And I'm really grateful to have an opportunity to give back and do it for my career and kind of intertwine all those things.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for being with us.
Of course.
I hope you've liked your time here.
It was great.
Well, thanks to Adam Rosen for coming. Next Tuesday, we have a very special guest. A little later on in the evening, Andy Baskin will be here to talk about Cleveland sports. Thank you very much, and have a good night.